Hi, Rhema. It's week 24, day 5 of our Bible narrative reading plan. Today we're in 1 Kings chapters 12 and 13. We've seen the end of the reign of King Solomon. His son Rehoboam is now reigning in his place. But we are also introduced or reminded of another very similar name, Jeroboam. Jeroboam was mentioned there at the end of 1 Kings chapter 12, and we see why Jeroboam was exiled off to Egypt. But now Rehoboam is reigning in his place. And so Solomon's son Rehoboam has some decisions to make because Jeroboam is coming back. He's acting as a Moses-like figure saying, I'm going to rescue my people from the bondage of Israel. He's coming out of Egypt wanting to rescue people out of the bondage of Israel because he says, look, things are so bad under Solomon. He has enslaved us, made us build this temple, build all these things. And now Jeroboam is a leader for the people who are unhappy. And they go to Rehoboam and they ask for relief. And so Rehoboam takes counsel from his old men, the wise men in his kingdom. And he gets their advice, but he also gets advice from the young men, the young punks who really don't know what they're talking about. And unfortunately, Rehoboam listens to them instead. Now notice as you read this passage that God knows every bit of this. None of this catches him by surprise. In fact, all of this is actually working according to his purposes because God has already declared that the kingdom will be divided. But that's exactly what takes place. And so now Jeroboam and Rehoboam, there's a division there going on. And we see that taking place here in these verses. The kingdom is divided just as God had prophesied. In verses 16 and following, the kingdom is divided. But war is averted at the end of chapter 24. It seems that there may be peace for a little while, but then we get to a critically important passage of the chapter. You see, this chapter begins by seemingly as if Jeroboam is going to serve as a Moses-type figure. But quickly he becomes an Aaron-type figure. Even as Rehoboam is acting like Pharaoh, and he's being very oppressive towards his people. He's saying, if you think you had it bad under Solomon, you're going to have it really bad under me. And Jeroboam seems to be the one who's going to rescue his people out of this bondage, but he goes from being Moses to being Aaron because he leads his people into false worship. Now, it seems at first as if he's going to give a politically savvy type of situation, that he's going to go and say, look guys, because of the way politics are right now, I can't have you going to Jerusalem. I'm not trying to stop you from worshiping God, but you can't go to the temple to worship God there. And so we're going to have to institute a place here for you to worship God here. At first that might sound reasonable to you, but understand that this is not what God has prescribed. Jeroboam is going against God. He says he's wanting to just introduce a new way to worship God. But there are no new ways to worship God. There are only God's ways to worship God. And so even as we see great similarities here between Aaron and the golden calf and Jeroboam's golden calves, we must be reminded again and again and again that it does matter how we worship God. No, things don't necessarily always look the same for us as they did in the Old Testament. But just as we've seen multiple times this week, the way we worship God is by drawing near to God through Christ. The Bible tells us a great deal about how we're to do that. We cannot give our hearts over to a quote-unquote new way of worship and find ourselves committing the same sins that Jeroboam has committed. Here's a summary of today's reading.
For more information, go to tunemyheart.org.